I'd like to welcome everyone to the seventh meeting of the Standing Committee on Government and Operations in this 41st Parliament. Today we have the orders of the day. We have witnesses the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman, Mr. Frank Brunetta, the Procurement Ombudsman. With him is Janet Barrington, the Principal for Quality Assurance and Risk Management. Welcome. And Janet LaBelle, Principal for Procurement Inquiries and Investigations. Welcome to you as well, Janet. And you won't have Mr. Paul Morse with you today as a witness?
I believe he's detained. I expect him to be here. He may be a little late.
Very good. Thank you. We would welcome an opening remarks from you, Mr. Brunetta, and then you'll be available for questions from our colleagues on the committee. Welcome.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci aux membres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to honourable members for this invitation. I welcome the opportunity to discuss with you the content of the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman 2010-2011 Annual Report.
The opportunity to discuss with you the content of the report of the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman's 2010-11 Annual Report. Since being appointed in January 2011, I have benefited from the work undertaken by my predecessor, Mr. Shahid Minto, in establishing the office. Mr. Minto retired in July 2010, and the Deputy Procurement Ombudsman oversaw the operations until my arrival. From the time of my arrival, it has been evident that the office is made up of quality people who believe what they are doing makes a difference to the fairness, openness, and transparency of federal procurement, and ultimately to the Canadian taxpayer. I am proud to have been chosen to lead this valued and trusted organization. Here with me today are Janet Barrington, the Director of Quality Assurance and Risk Management, and to my right, Janet LaBelle, Director of Inquiries and Investigation, and Mr. Paul Morse, Director of Practice Reviews, just joined us. My remarks today, Mr. Chairman, will focus on three areas covered in my report. I'll provide an overview of the Office's mandate and its services. I'll provide a brief overview of the 2010-11 results achieved by the Office, and then give the committee a sense of where I plan on taking the Office. Let me begin with a brief overview of my Office's mandate and the services we provide. In 2006, the government enacted the Federal Accountability Act, providing, among other things, the appointment of a procurement ombudsman. The office was created through an amendment of the Department of Public Works and Government Services Act and became fully operational in May 2008 with the coming into force of the Procurement Ombudsman regulations. We have a government-wide mandate covering most departments and agencies. The three main exceptions to this government-wide mandate are the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the staff of the House of Commons and Senate, and Crown corporations. Our mandate, as set out in legislation, is to do the four following things: to review any complaints respecting the award of a contract for the acquisition of goods below the value of $25,000 and services below the value of $100,000, to review any complaint respecting the administration of a contract for the acquisition of material or services regardless of that dollar value, ensure that an alternative dispute resolution process is provided if both parties agree to participate, and review the practices of departments for acquiring material and services to assess their fairness, openness, and transparency. In addition, I am required to perform any duty respecting the practices of departments for acquiring material and services assigned to me by the Minister of Public Works and Government Services or Governor in Council. My position reports to the Minister of Public Works and Government Services. The Office's enabling legislation requires that I submit an annual report to the Minister, who in turn tables the report in Parliament. The Office has approximately 25 full-time positions with a budget of roughly $4 million. Although the Office receives its funding through a Public Works and Government Services appropriation, it is approved by the Treasury Board, and only the Treasury Board can alter this appropriation. The Office is independent and operates at arm's length from federal departments and agencies, and I have full control over the execution of our mandate and our day-to-day operations. Prior to the creation of the Office, the procurement system was limited in providing a recourse mechanism for suppliers dealing with issues related to the award of low dollar value contracts and contract administration issues. While suppliers with issues related to the award of large dollar value contracts could go to the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, suppliers with issues concerning low dollar value contracts or contract administration issues had three choices, none of them very practical. They could attempt to have the issues addressed by the department they were dealing with, they could simply accept the issue or take legal action. So in creating the office, the government addressed the need for these low dollar supplier contracts. Let me now move to the results of the office for the 2010-2011 fiscal year. Following the retirement of the inaugural ombudsman, the office was without an ombudsman for approximately 6 months. The regulations prohibit the office from launching new investigation and reviews without an ombudsman. However, the day-to-day business of the office continued. Our inquiries and investigation team is our day-to-day interface with our stakeholders. The team responds to calls and emails from suppliers and the procurement community. I consider this area a critical aspect of my office. Accordingly, we have implemented a service-first business model, ensuring that each contact with the office receives prompt, personalized, and seamless service. Our primary objective when dealing with suppliers is to address their issues and concerns through dialogue and information sharing before the issue escalates into a lengthy or expensive dispute. We also see our role as a service to Canadians and are diligent in ensuring issues, even those that do not fall within our mandate, are brought to the attention of the appropriate office. In executing the office's mandate, we are careful to be neither a lobbyist for supplier nor an apologist for the federal departments. For the period covered by our annual report, the office was contacted 329 times. Of these contacts, 110 were actual procurement-related complaints. Of the 110 complaints received by my office, 81 or 74% were with regard to the award of a contract. The issues being raised by suppliers in this area were primarily around the statements of work, which define requirements being unclear, bid evaluation criteria being too restrictive, or the process of evaluating bids being perceived as unfair. 23 of the 110, or 21% of the complaints received by my office had to do with the administration of contracts. In this category, suppliers typically raise concerns about late payments and about departments verbally altering contract terms and conditions after the work had begun. The remaining 6 or 5% were direct requests for practice reviews or alternative dispute resolution. The breakdown that I provided and the types of concerns that I've outlined are fairly consistent with what the office has heard in previous years. I should mention that all complaints that met the regulatory parameters of the office were actioned. We released 3 investigative reports, 2 carried over from 2009-10 and 1 which originated in 2010-11. All 3 complaints which led to the investigations concern the award of contracts. The office also provides alternative dispute resolution services when requested, and all parties to the contract agree to participate. The office provides an opportunity for the parties to come together in an unbiased setting to discuss their contractual dispute. Our objective here is for the parties to reach a mutually agreeable settlement. In 2010-11, we received 10 ADR requests. 2 did not meet the requirements under our regulations. Of the remaining 8, 4 were declined by the departments involved as the department was pursuing its own internal dispute resolution process. 3 were successfully resolved by the office, and 1 case that was ongoing has been resolved by the office since the tabling of the annual report. The office also conducts reviews of practices of departments for acquiring material and services to assess their fairness, openness, and transparency. Our reviews follow a similar methodology as performance audits, using a systemic, evidence-based approach. Last year, we launched 4 procurement practice reviews. 1 of these reviews was recently published, and the other 3 are in various stages of completion. All of the office's practice review reports are made public and available on our website. Last year, we also published a risk-based study on directed contracts under $25,000. This study was initiated in part due to comments and concerns about these contracts raised to my predecessor by this committee. Based on the office's 2010-11, based on our work in 2010-11, we noted that while departments have made strides to assist the supplier community in doing business with government, Calls received by my office from suppliers suggest that more can be done. Many calls received by the office are from suppliers unclear on how to do business with the federal government. Likewise, we are hearing from suppliers confused by the government solicitation bidding process, having difficulty understanding solicitation documents, or unclear on how to submit responsive proposals for inclusion in procurement vehicles such as standing offers and supply arrangements. What appears to be frustrating suppliers is their difficulty in obtaining information or clarification from government procurement officials. A large number of cases that come to our attention involve concerns that could have been avoided through open and clear dialogue. We have had some cases where suppliers have been reluctant to disclose the names of departments with which they have procurement concerns for fear of being excluded from future business opportunities. I am doing some follow-up work on these cases and hope to have a better understanding of this issue in the coming weeks. Now, in terms of moving forward with the office, it's my view that evolving the office from the basic startup mode, which it's been in, to optimum operation and delivery will be essential if the office is to realize its mission in promoting fairness, openness, and transparency in federal procurement. Instrumental in our evolution will be the implementation of the office's recently completed strategic plan. The strategic plan clearly lays out that our work will be guided by three strategic drivers: to educate, to facilitate wherever possible, and to investigate when authorized to do so. In addition, I have initiated other activities to better position the office. For example, it's my view that the office can only be effective if it is in tune with the community it was created to serve. Accordingly, we have developed and are in the process of executing a concerted outreach program. Also, a formative evaluation of the office's first 3 years of operation is being initiated. This is being conducted to provide the information to better understand how well the office is executing its responsibilities and to make the necessary adjustments to the nature of our work and organization. The overarching objective in undertaking this work is to structure and equip the office to meet the expectations and fulfill the mandate envisioned by parliamentarians when the office began operating in 2008. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. Merci beaucoup. We welcome any questions the committee might have at this time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brunella, for that report. Questioning from committee members then. Our first will be the official opposition, Alexandra Bouleris.
Bonjour, Monsieur Brunetta. Merci beaucoup.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brunetta. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for being here. We certainly appreciate it. My first question. I would like to understand the rationale for the rule that you can only look at contract for goods under $25,000 and services below the value of $100,000. Why was that rule set out? What does it? Why was that put in place? Thanks for the question.
Opening statement, the suppliers of large dollar value contracts prior to the creation of my office had a venue for their complaints through the CITT. But the government recognized that there was a gap for suppliers of low dollar value contracts. If you were a supplier to government providing a service, a good for under $25,000 or a service under $100,000, the CITT was not available to you. As I mentioned, these individuals essentially had three choices. They could swallow hard and just accept the fact that there was an issue. They could try to take it up with the department they were dealing with, or they could take costly legal action. And for small and medium enterprise, legal action erodes the bottom line and is not very practical. So the office was created to fill that gap.
Merci. Ma deuxième question.
Thank you. My second question is this. You look at the 325,000 contracts that represent $20 billion. It is a huge amount of money. From your estimates and assessments, because you oversee all of this, what percentage of contracts that are given out to suppliers that go through a call for tender, which is a a good way of assuring the best product at the best price? Is there a systematic practice for that? Is it the majority of cases or the minority of cases?
I have to refer to my colleague Janet Barrington here for the answer. Janet was the author of the under $25,000 study, and I don't have that number handy, but perhaps Janet, having done the study, would. Janet, can you answer?
Yes, thank you for the question. Roughly 90% and more of contracts per year are under the $25,000 threshold for competition. This is a number that's been consistent over the last 10 years. In the review we conducted looking into directed contracts under $25,000, we found that in 2008 approximately 60% of those contracts, of the 60% of the 90%, were not competed.
We're not.
Were not.
OK. Merci. Selon vous, est-ce que ça devrait être une pratique qui devrait être encouragée pour améliorer justement la
So there needs to be an increase in transparency and fairness among suppliers. Could something be put in place to promote this type of competition among suppliers?
The government contracting regulations are based on competition. They require competition. The $25,000 threshold is put in place because I believe it's considered low dollar value, and it's not always practical or economic to run a competition for low dollar value contracts.
Mais 20 milliards de dollars, c'est beaucoup d'argent.
20 billion is quite a lot of money. In your opinion, should the rule about the $25,000 be changed or the $100,000 limit be changed? Should we be extending your scope? I apologize. I want to make sure I understand. Change the mandate of the office or change the limits? Change the limits.
Office for 9 months, it's premature for me to speculate on whether that limit should be changed. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest there's an issue. The volumes seem to tell a story, but I don't have the evidence or the background to say that that's an inappropriate limit.
Merci.
Next, Jacques Gourde for the Conservative Party, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here, for the information they'll be providing. I'm pleased to point out that when the government introduced the Accountability Act to make the government transparent, and we're trying constantly to improve it. It was our government that created the Procurement Ombudsman in 2006 to strengthen Canadians' confidence in the procurement process, which forces the government to promote equity. Mr. Brunet, to what extent do you think that the Procurement Ombudsman has helped improve the procurement process in the federal government to make it even more open, fairer, and transparent? Thank you for your question.
In my previous response, I think it's still early days for the office. The office has been in place for 3 years, so to what extent is difficult to gauge at this stage. But I will say that it is the first time that a dedicated body is in place looking at the procurement issues. Prior to the creation of the office, there was no dedicated body looking at issues arising from the supplier community. There was the odd internal audit that may have looked at procurement, and the Auditor General occasionally touched on it, but there was no dedicated body such as this office looking at procurement. So I think that's helped to strengthen confidence. The office provides a unique service in it helps review complaints. It supplies ADR services for the system, and it reviews practice reviews. So from that perspective, I believe it provides some assurance that someone in the system is monitoring what's going on. So from that perspective, I think it's a step in the right direction in strengthening confidence. Whether we can gauge that at this early stage is, I believe it's doubtful. But on that note, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I have initiated a formative evaluation of the office to see what areas could be improved to further improve what we're doing and how we do it to strengthen that confidence.
Monsieur Brunetta, pouvez-vous me faire un parallèle?
Mr. Brunet, could you draw a parallel between the 90s with the procurement services and the improvements that have been made since 2005 and thereafter?
I'm too young to remember the 90s. You tossed that one at me. But that's not true. Yes, I think that we've come a long way since the 90s, especially in the area of transparency. I think the Internet has done wonders to open transparency. When we look at the measures that are now in place with proactive disclosure, the MERCS postings, these are all very progressive steps. And I should mention that the office often hosts foreign delegations, and these are very envious things that we're doing. We have foreign delegations that can't believe when we take them through the web that we can actually show people not only what contracts are being afforded or offered by federal departments, but we can actually show them what contracts have been awarded. So I think drawing a comparison from the 90s of transparency has been a huge leap forward. I believe the government's come a long way as well in making certain procurement vehicles available to make the process more efficient. For example, we now have mandatory standing offers and supply arrangements. These are efficiency tools that are in place that weren't in place in the 90s. Again, the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman is, I think, a positive step that takes us forward from the 90s. So I think there has been a lot of progress since the 90s, definitely.
Est-ce que Monsieur Brunetta...
Mr. Brunetta, I'm going to be frank with you. The government created the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman because before 2006 there was a very negative climate in terms of contract awarding. So it followed up on the sponsorship scandal that your office was created. Did the creation of the office strengthen Canadians' confidence in the supply process to Canadian companies? Has that helped things?
Mentioned in my earlier response, I believe it has. The degree to which it's strengthened, I can't say, and that's one of the reasons I'm undertaking the evaluation.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Jacques. Denis Blanchette.
Denis Blanchette. Welcome, Mr. Brunetta. Good afternoon. So there are about 325,000 contracts that you're looking at. If you've had 110 complaints of those. That's not a lot. Do you think we can say that, generally speaking, in the public service, the awarding of contracts is done properly? Would that be your conclusion?
Merci pour la question.
For the question?
While there are roughly 300 to 350,000 contracts let by government every year, I do not oversee that volume. The mandate of the office is such that I can only investigate once I receive a formal complaint. The mandate is fairly prescriptive as outlined in the regulations. The question you were asking was whether the process is fair and equitable. I'm sorry.
Est-ce que
In your view, following your evaluations, not just the complaint processing, do you think that generally speaking, your opinion is that contracts are awarded properly in most cases?
Well, I'll use the context you provided. There are roughly 300 to 350,000 contracts issued every year. When I look at the CITT numbers, I believe on any given year the CITT receives about 100 complaints. We receive 100 complaints. The numbers would suggest that the system is working. But when you look at that sort of volume, it's inevitable. I think it'd be naive to think that with that sort of volume we wouldn't have issues here and there. But taking a step back and looking at it holistically, I believe the system is working. Certainly there are issues, and I am not sitting here trying to tell you that there are not. But on the whole, this is a big machine that's operating, and there are very few issues that are surfacing to our office or to the CITT that would suggest otherwise. When we look at some of the investigations we do, we step back every time an investigation is completed to try to assess what went wrong, get out of the detail and try to determine whether a systemic issue. In the vast majority of cases that we've looked at in the past year, at least since I've been there, it's been administrative errors and oversights, people trying to cut corners. I haven't seen to date, and I want to caution the committee, it's early for me, any reason to suspect there's a untoward or activity or issues. It's administrative, I'll call them blunders.
Aussi, je voudrais savoir.
There's something else that I would like to know. Based on your experience and your colleagues' experience, how would you describe most of the problems you encounter? Is it a problem of perception as to how the federal government works? Is it really a genuine problem? Or isn't more education required regarding access to contracts?
La question. I would categorize the issues in two categories. The first is a category of, I'll call them new entrants to government contracts. And the callers and the complaints we get there are primarily around a lack of understanding how things work. So small and medium enterprise trying to get their foot in the door are having difficulty. It's at times, the way it's expressed, it's overwhelming. They just don't understand how to do business. I think there's an opportunity to help those folks. With the people that are doing business already in government, the second category, the issues there that we're hearing about are primarily around the administration of the contract. Once the contract is let and agreements are in place and the work begins, there are often verbal agreements to change the process. And this is not it's not untypical. Imagine doing work in your own home. You ask a contractor to remove a wall, and then you realize there are 3 vents behind it you hadn't anticipated. It's very similar in the government process. You start a job expecting something new comes up, and quite frankly, the rules require you to sit down and do a formal change and not the work to stop. But we have very diligent public servants who want the work to continue. There's a deadline. So there's a verbal agreement. People say, yes, go ahead, make that change. We'll deal with the paperwork later. And it's inevitable that when that paperwork comes in, there's something that hadn't been expected. And that's when the dispute begins. That's where we get the call. The second part of that equation is late payments. As I mentioned earlier, we do get calls from suppliers to government who feel that they're not getting paid in time. So those would be how I categorize.
We're well over time. Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Mr. Trottier.
Thank you. I don't have to do that. Thank you for coming in today. You mentioned, 300 to 350,000 contracts per year, 110 complaints, so that's not a lot. Now, but obviously the process isn't perfect. You did mention that of those complaints, a lot of those were because of the bid evaluation and selection process and the criteria not being visible. Could you describe, and there's a difference when it comes to services versus goods procurement especially. I think there's a lot of subjective criteria that come into play when you're looking at the capability of certain vendors to execute work. But could you describe where you might have seen some issues with the selection criteria, how those were established, and some of the scoring of bidders, where you had to look at some subjective criteria to determine whether they're actually capable of doing the work? Because as you know, it's not just a question of awarding it to the lowest cost bidder if there's a strong sense that this bidder is not actually capable of executing the work that they say they're capable of doing.
So you're asking for examples of subjective criteria?
Is that a problem that was perceived in some of the complaints that you did investigate, that the bid evaluation and selection process was flawed and there was a need to take some corrective action and fix the process?
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, we do get complaints where there's a perception that the bid evaluation process was somehow skewed or inappropriate. But you have to understand that in a bidding process there are clear winners and clear losers, and the losers will always try to understand why they didn't win. When we look at some of these complaints, I can't honestly say that the issues fall on one side or the other. In a lot of cases, the departments have done everything well. The evaluation criteria is clear. What they may have done better is communicated with the supplier. And there's where a lot of our issues come up. The process is flawless. The documents are flawless. But for reasons unbeknownst to us, there's a reluctance to debrief the bidder comprehensively, and that leads to a perception that things are not what they should be. Now, there are cases where, yes, we've dealt with one recently where the bid evaluation criteria we found to be subjective, and we brought that to the attention of the department. And I believe in that case, Janet, we actually recommended compensation to the complainant because we felt that he had been unfairly dealt with.
Just a follow-up question. When it comes to transparency and openness in procurement, are there any structural barriers that you see in especially these $100,000 service contracts where certain competent bidders aren't being allowed to put bids forward because of some barriers? There might be some criteria that the government establishes that have little to do with the actual ability to execute the work, but there's a barrier that's been imposed on them, and therefore we're not giving opportunities to small and medium enterprises, services enterprises in particular.
I'm going to have to turn to my colleagues to see whether we have examples of that.
Thank you for the question. Actually, we did do an investigation last year, which is reported on the annual report that you have in front of you. In that particular instance, there was a mandatory technical requirement for a certain level of professional designation. And at issue was the complainant felt that there were other opportunities for him having a different type of professional designation. So we did the investigation, and we found that notwithstanding that, it did not preclude him from bidding because he didn't bid. The department agreed with our findings and actually has undertaken a study to see if perhaps they can add more accreditations and designations to open up this field.
Okay. And then kind of related to that, when it comes to some interprovincial trade barriers that might exist, is there any evidence that there are certain government procurement practices that aren't allowing enterprises from across the country to bid on contracts? And again, I guess my experience relates more to services contracts where that kind of thing could be very mobile, but because of some trade barriers, could be professional designations, other things, where SMEs aren't able to bid on contracts that take place in other provinces.
I don't believe we've done enough work to provide an adequate answer there. That area is one that hasn't crossed our office yet.
Mr. Trottier, that concludes your time. If I might just ask for a point of clarification based on some of your answers, Mr. Brunetta, or perhaps actually Janet. We were talking about 325,000 contracts roughly per year for the federal government, valued at $20 billion. You were saying 90% of those are under $25,000, and so therefore would be within the realm of the Office of the Ombudsman
Yes.
to complaints?
That
And
would be
roughly,
correct.
so we understood that correctly, and roughly 60% of those are not tendered? Is that, did I understand?
That's what we found in the study we carried out in 2008, yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, that's what we found in the
Yes.
study we carried out, yes.
Could you then just tell us, if you know, what would be the total value of untendered contracts given out by the government per year? If the 325,000 equaled 20 billion, 90% of those are under 25K, but the remaining 10% may be very valuable. So I'm just trying to get an idea of the dollar value of the total contracts that fall under the jurisdiction of this office.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps we can get back to you with that. I don't know that we have that answer handy.
I don't have that readily available. I do know that the value is quite low. Out of the 20 billion, it's quite low, the
Yeah.
value of the under 25K contracts.
I would suspect.
Not sure I have the number handy.
Intuitively,
So
I would
it's
say
90%. It's 90% of the
Of
contracts,
the number of contracts.
but the very small percentage of the $20 billion
Correct.
dollar figure. If you could get us a guesstimate and submit it to the committee, we'd be interested.
Intuitively, Mr. Chairman, I would say that that's the case. The volume in the numbers are under 25. The materiality in the dollar would be in that 10%. That's where you have your military procurements and what have you. But we'll confirm that and get back to you.
Thank you. Because we have a vacancy today, we'll go right to the next Conservative questioner, Scott Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brunetta, for your presentation here today. I have several questions. I'm going to start. Is there any particular government department, you just mentioned defense, that you've had a particular interest in reviewing or had a particular amount of complaints about?
That's a very good question, Mr. Armstrong. It's a question that I asked the office. We have a case management system which allows us to log the numbers of complaints coming in and allows us to collect other information. One of the things I wanted to know was there a particular department that comes up more than others? And not surprisingly, it's Public Works, but it's not because they're a problematic department. This is the procurement arm of the government, and it only makes sense that most of the issues are around Public Works. After that, the data is pretty scattered. There isn't any particular department that jumps out.
Right, so we're not looking at any particular black holes or one department that's not doing this very well.
Absolutely.
The complaints are coming in and out pretty much spread out equally.
And that's exactly the line of questioning I wanted to follow. I wanted to know whether there was a particular area in government that represented most of the calls. That would have given me evidence to do a practice review or follow something up with that department. But that line of questioning didn't materialize in anything significant.
Great. Next week, this committee is going to begin a study on the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises and a particular program in that office. How effectively do you believe this office facilitates and supports small and medium enterprises to get business with the federal government?
I'm familiar with the OSME office, and I can't say that I can give you an answer on how well they do things.
Yeah.
What I will tell you is that based on the calls that we're receiving, there is a definite need for this type of office. As I mentioned earlier, new entrants into government business are finding it very difficult. A lot of the calls that we get are basic questions, how do I get myself on MERCs? How do I understand? And a vast majority of those are forwarded to the OSME office. That's their role. So how effective they are, I can't say. Is there a need for an office of that nature? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are you familiar with the Canadian Innovation Commercialization Program?
Unfortunately, I'm not, no.
Okay, I'm going to move on then. Could you give some examples of some of the best practices you've seen in procurement of the public service?
Thank you for the question. Yes, this is actually one of the areas that our office tries to promote. While we're quite diligent in trying to uncover issues where there are issues and try to correct them, the other aspect of what we do is to identify best practices and try to disseminate those best practices in hopes that other government departments pick up on them. I think there are three main areas that I'd like to talk about. The first one is, I mentioned in the annual report, we're finding that in some departments, program managers are involving the procurement community at the front end of the decision-making process. So when there's a decision to launch a new program or build a particular building, having the procurement folks at the table is very important. They need to understand the rationale for the requirements. They need to understand how things are working. What we found on the other end of the spectrum, and we've been told this by procurement officials, this is the poor practice, is that they're called in when the decisions are made and they're having to scramble. And that's when we know and we've seen the corners get cut because a program manager is under extreme pressure to deliver. The person hasn't accommodated the time that it requires to do procurement, and mistakes wind up being made. So I believe one of the best practices that we've seen is to involve the procurement officials at the front end of the program development process. The second is a due diligence initiative. The departments that we go into where procurement is working fairly well have robust functioning procurement review committees. So any of the procurement that the department is undertaking in any given month, most of these committees meet monthly if not quarterly, are reviewed by the procurement committee. This is something that my predecessor mentioned in a couple of reports and something that I believe is a very good practice.
Scott, that's the end of your time. If we could, perhaps you could finish your answer
Sure.
in the context of another question. Matthew.
Thank you.
Yes. Matthew Ravenel, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for coming and for obviously your important work. I guess just to introduce myself to the rest of my colleagues, I'm now the critic for the Opposition for Public Works and Government Services. So I'm here in that function. So my question relates to, I'll give you a little bit of a context. You may be aware of it, and no doubt you are, that the Americans have put forward a bill that includes a Buy American provision. So surrounding that, I'll be asking you questions about your role. So as you know, within NAFTA, there's a number of exemptions for purchases of goods. These include, the RCMP, national defense, a number of other things, R&D and health, social services, but also contracts below $28,000, right? But between April 1st, 2007 and March 31st, 2008, there were 466 contracts under the NAFTA threshold that were awarded to vendors in the United States. For example, Public Works and Government Services Canada had a contract to a Missouri firm for industrial sewing machines at Corrections Canada. So my first question is, do you advise the government departments on the use of Canadian suppliers?
Thank you for the question. No, my mandate does not involve advising
Okay.
government on any aspect of procurement.
Okay. do you track the use of non-Canadian suppliers?
Again, that is not within the mandate of the office.
Okay, so I guess my following question would be, do you think that this would be a proper enhancement of the mandate of Ombudsman?
It's difficult for me to answer that question. As I see it, as I mentioned earlier, the current mandate was developed to fill a gap that existed in the system. Whether it needs to be expanded beyond that is really a Parliament's decision.
Thank you.
That concludes your questions, Matthew. There's 2.5 minutes left in that round. You did already. Well, sometimes I have the odd question. That's all right for the chair to ask the odd question, surely.
Time slot, there's nothing wrong with it.
I see.
I learned that from you and another committee member, my friend.
Oh,
so there you go.
Comes back to haunt you. Well, I am. Well, actually, I do have one question I wouldn't mind adding. Thank you for suggesting that, Mike. Are you concerned that there's a reluctance to file complaints for fear of reprisals, or not file complaints, but to come to the Ombudsman? Because I take it you really can't guarantee anonymity because you're trying to resolve an issue between a vendor and a supplier who have to be identified. Is there a reluctance, is there a chill amongst the contracting community about coming forward for fear of not being favorably considered the next time they come forward?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. That is an issue that I raised in my annual report, and to be quite blunt, it was the most startling thing that I discovered when we were preparing the annual report. As I was combing through the data with staff, I realized some of these numbers were falling off the table, and I started to ask, why aren't we dealing with these? And the answer came back, these are suppliers that don't want to pursue the issue because they're afraid of being shut out of future business. So it is an issue that concerns me enough that I added it in the annual report. We're doing three things to better understand that issue, Mr. Chairperson. The first is I realized in the work that we were doing that when we respond to calls from suppliers and they are reluctant, we weren't asking the right questions. We were basically saying the individual's reluctant, they don't want us to pursue it, we'll put the case on a pending file, and that's where it's sat. So we've changed, as of not too long ago, the questioning to better probe the caller, to better understand why the reluctance is there. So going forward, I hope to have a better understanding of that reluctance. Now, looking at the cases that occurred last year, we're in the process of following up with each individual supplier that expressed that concern to see whether there's any comfort level in revealing to us why the issue surfaced in the first place. So I'm hoping to get a better understanding of that. The last thing we've done is I've approached an industry association to see whether they would be willing to assist us through their channels in approaching some of their members to see whether there is in fact an issue. So with those three initiatives, I hope to have a better answer on why that reluctance exists.
That's very interesting. Thank you. It's now actually the turn of Peter Braid. Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to other witnesses for being here this afternoon. Mr. Brunetta, then, if I could just follow on that particular issue, that particular topic, do you expect to have a clear understanding, potentially, of why there may be some reluctance in next year's report? Is that the timeline that we're looking at?
I hadn't, quite honestly, I hadn't really thought about putting it in next year's report. My primary objective is to understand the issue, and if there is an issue here, to surface it, to have it resolved. I'd be more than happy to share the results of our work with this committee if it's of benefit to your work.
Is it possible that one of the reasons for reluctance is just simple human nature?
I've thought about this. As I said, it bothered me when I heard about it. And yes, you know, as I said to the staff, we're Canadians. We don't send back soup when it's cold. In my heart of hearts, I hope that's the issue. Intuitively, I think it is, but until I get the information, I don't want to. I don't want to say.
Understood. Thank you. Changing gears a little bit, I'm curious to know about the alternate dispute resolution mechanism. It sounds a little cutting edge. Does the ADR apply to the contract award part of your mandate, or the contract administration, or both?
It applies to the dispute around the terms and conditions of a contract.
Okay, so most are administration
The administration side.
Okay. And can you give us an example of, and I understand you need to respect confidentiality and not provide details, but can you, in general terms, give us an example of a case or a situation that's well suited for your ADR mechanism?
If the chair will allow me, I'll turn to Janet LaBelle, who's responsible. She just conducted a case in the Quebec region that would answer the question perfectly, I believe.
Excellent.
Yeah. Actually, we have done a number of alternative dispute resolution facilitations, just so that all the members are aware. We must have both and all parties agree to participate in this. We also work very closely at the outset to try and resolve this and have whatever dispute addressed prior to it going to any sort of formal legal action. So in one particular case that we had a company who the contract was actually terminated for cause, and they felt that that should not have been. It was deemed by our legal counsel as an application of a term or condition of the contract. And we sat down with the company and with the department, and we ended up addressing that to the satisfaction of both of the parties. The department agreed that, in fact, it really wasn't for cause, and they agreed that they would change that termination. And the company was very happy because they felt that that would have been a slight on them, and they didn't want to have that on their record. So that's one example that we've recently done.
Great. It sounds like a very good outcome as well for all parties. That leads me to my next question as well. It's always important to have an effective way of dealing with complaints from a customer service perspective. One of the things you like to see after dealing with complaints is seeing improvements to systems and processes as well. Can you give us an example where a complaint or a trending of complaints has led to an actual improvement in an overall process?
That's a very good question. Allow me to ask Janet if she can...
I knew you were going to do that.
I can go to another one. Okay.
Actually, we, in terms of trending of complaints, we have a business model. I have an absolutely fabulous team that are, they're all procurement experts. They've been trained in investigations, and they are also trained in ADR. So we have a seamless approach to this, but we do deal with individuals and complaints separate and apart from each other. We use evidentiary thresholds that are obviously not beyond a reasonable doubt, but on a balance of probabilities, and we don't use evidence from one file to another. So it's very difficult to say at this point that we're actually having trends for improvements. That would actually fall into our practice reviews of government departments. All the information that we have feeds into the whole organization for our business decisions.
Thank you. If I might add to that, that's a practice within the office. When we collect the data coming in from callers, from supplier complaints, we track to see if there's a trend. If there is a trend, as you say, That provides us with the grounds to launch a practice review, which is a more comprehensive review of the issue. And there have been a couple of cases that's happened.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Peter. Alexandra, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brunetta, I want to ask a question, but first of all, I'm going to quote from your report, which the interpreter doesn't have, a section where you say, to conclude, Treasury Board has made it obligatory to use standing offers and supply arrangements in 2005 for 10 groups of goods for the most commonly purchased goods. Despite this measure, we found that in 2008, over 200,000 contracts, for 2/3 of all contracts, in other words, were awarded in contractual arrangements other than standing offers and supply arrangements. In other words, 2/3 of contracts did not meet the requirements set out by Treasury Board. Is that correct? Do you think that's reasonable? Thanks for the question.
As I mentioned earlier, I believe it was in response to a question of what's changed since the 90s. A few years ago, standing offers and supply arrangements for certain commodities became mandatory. The reason for making them mandatory is that it made things more efficient for departments rather than doing contracts on their own for these common goods and services. It only made sense to bundle them and have them done together. It's the critical mass theory where it's cheaper to get done as a package. What we're discussing there in the report is that while the policy says that it's mandatory, some departments are not following that policy. They're still going off on their own. We believe that if the government is going to generate the efficiencies that it had anticipated with these standing offers and other type vehicles, that mandatory clause should be enforced.
Merci beaucoup. Effectivement, sinon c'est une obligation qui est un peu.
All right. It's a requirement that remains rather theoretical. On page 17 of your report, you talk about a complaint with respect to the awarding of a service contract. There was a complaint about a conflict of interest situation. However, you say that the investigation didn't collect any proof about these allegations, but the office concluded that this led to a perception of conflict of interest or undue advantage. So the department decided to cancel the arrangement, which was problematic, and to take corrective action to improve its supply practices. What steps did you take to correct situations where there was the appearance of conflict of interest? I'm just trying to understand which case you're referring to. It's on page 17 in the French version, of course. Under investigations, point 1.
Cited on page 17, our role under investigations is to reveal the facts. We use a recognized methodology to perform the investigation. We reveal the facts and present the facts. Where we see that there is corrective action required, we make recommendations. So the role of the office in this case was to make recommendations to correct the issue that we had uncovered.
If I could just add to that, to give a little bit of a background in this particular investigation, it involved an agency, a part of a larger department, and the award of the contract in question was to a not-for-profit organization. And the complainant felt that it was not fair, and he also felt that the agency was also involved in the creation of the organization and was sitting on its board of directors and had shared space. So there were lots of information that we had to work with. When we contacted the department, which we do on every investigation by legislation, and also with the written permission of the complainant. The agency immediately undertook an internal review, and as we moved forward on the investigation, they recognized that there was certainly a potential for an appearance of a conflict of interest, and they undertook immediately internal changes to the structure and actually stopped their relationship with the organization completely.
That concludes your time, Alexandra. Kelly Block for the Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I join my colleagues in welcoming you here today and thanking you for being here. I've really appreciated learning about your office and your explanation regarding your role and your mandate, especially in filling that gap for the small to medium-sized businesses. You've suggested, Mr. Brunetta, that it's fairly early days for you in your position to provide any kind of an assessment on what's working and or what kind of improvements may need to be made within your office. But in your opening comments, you made reference to your office's recently completed strategic plan that will be guided by 3 strategic drivers. You also referenced this in your annual report, and you called them 3 pillars. And I'm just wondering if you would be willing to expand on those 3 pillars and how they will assist you in delivering your mandate.
Certainly. And thank you for the question. Let me begin by saying that I believe a large part of my responsibility and the office's responsibility is to educate. That's the first component of the pillars. And as I've mentioned so far this afternoon, I believe that whether we can help prevent procurement concerns from escalating through early intervention or providing relevant information, I believe that our office is key in helping educate either stakeholders or the procurement community. So the idea of disseminating best practices and information that's being provided to us from suppliers within government, or explaining the procurement system to suppliers, I believe that that's a key role that this office has to play. As I mentioned to you, a lot of the calls that we're getting are around this pillar. People, especially new entrants to government business, are not sure how to do things, and I believe our role is either to provide whatever information we can or direct them in the right direction. The second pillar is the facilitate pillar, and I find this one to be a particularly important one in that a lot of the calls that we're receiving from suppliers, they're at the point where they're completely frustrated with government. They've reached their end of the rope, and they want something done. So in these cases, we see our role, or I see the office's role in putting that person in contact with the right individual. I'm sure we've all experienced cases where we're trying to get a hold of some office in government and we get the proverbial runaround. In the case of my office, I don't want that to happen. We'll make the calls. We'll put the person in contact with whoever he or she needs to be in contact with to do business with government. The other side of that equation is when things have escalated, the suppliers dealt with a government department trying to resolve an issue, and they've gotten to the point where the only recourse is legal. We want to be involved to facilitate some dialogue there, and that's either through the facilitation process or from our ADR business line. And then finally, I believe we have a very important role in investigating. A lot of the issues that come to us are very fixable through facilitation, but it's inevitable that occasionally there are issues that need to be investigated. In that case, whether it's through a practice review, a study, or a formal investigation, I believe my role is to go into the issue, the file, or the organization, uncover the facts, and present them as I see them, so that there's transparency around what's occurred. So the strategic plan that we've developed are around those three pillars.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you could tell me how many staff are employed in your office.
We have a budget of 25 in government lingo FTEs, but the actual number of people in the office fluctuates between 18 and 22. We have, as any other organization, departures and promotions.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Block. That concludes your time, and that also concludes the second round of questioning, Mr. Brunetta, so that we're all finished with you as a witness, and we thank you very much to you and your staff for coming and presenting your report and answering questions from the committee. And we hope you become a regular visitor to this committee as you submit annual reports, or in between reports as we may deem necessary to give you a call. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. I hope the presentation and the answers were informative, and I welcome the opportunity to come again.
I think we all agree it was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we could ask committee members to stick around for 5 minutes, we're going to go bang the gavel and go in camera and approve our annual budget, if that's agreeable.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Do we have to, I'm willing to move this budget. Do we have to go in camera for that?
No.
I think it'll take 10 seconds.
Probably.
So the budget that's presented in front of us, I'll move, is for the guests that we've invited for the upcoming study. Is that not correct?
Yes, it is. This is the study for the budget that we've agreed to on the offices of small and medium-sized enterprises.
Well, I'm happy to move that then.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there speakers on the motion?
No, it's not on the motion, but I have a declaration to make to this committee.
Oh, that's right. If we could, we'll deal with this budget, and then if we could ask people to stay for 1 minute more, Alexandra has something he would like to say to the committee.
Okay.
So hearing no other debate on the motion to approve the budget for the study on OSME, all those in favor? Down? Carried. Very good.
The other piece, do we need to approve that also? The report?
I'm sorry, that's right. Just for information to the committee members, your steering committee had a meeting the other day. Can't remember when it was, but this is the first report of the steering committee that's been circulated to you, and we need the approval of the committee for the recommendations of the steering committee.
Right. So the steering committee just sets out the agenda up till November break. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll support that then.
So move to carry the report, first report of the subcommittee. So moved. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you. Alexandra, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would like to apologize to you, to the committee, and to the members. There was a mistake about the rules made at one of the last committee meeting. The in-camera rules were not respected. We understood the in-camera meeting meant that there would be no witnesses. So we will not make this mistake again in the future.
And thank you, committee members. That is a motion to adjourn. Move. Carried.